Dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
Vision is certainly one of the greatest challenges to leadership. In many ways, leaders are called to stare into the void where nothing seems possible and find a path forward. Already, this is a terrific blessing for our world because it allows for innovation and success. But God wants to do something even more with vision. He wants His leaders to accomplish His will and to work His plan. St. Paul teaches us just how to cooperate with God to make this happen. Hey everybody, I know that you're in a tough situation because you're trying to lead, which means that you're under pressure. And you have to create results, make an impact, change the world on a daily basis. And this doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're in a business. It doesn't matter if you're a mother at home. It doesn't matter if you're a single person in your social setting. You know, wherever we are, we need, if we're going to be alive, we're going to encounter resistance. And we need to find a pathway through what is possible to something that we want. How else am I supposed to actually find a spouse if I don't find a way to find a spouse? That's an example, right? How am I supposed to make a change that I need, lose the weight that I want to lose, if I don't find a way to do it? I have to go from what is known into the unknown. Whether I'm running a business as a big executive or I'm managing a team or I'm a simple entrepreneur, my life is constantly being called to go further and deeper than what I can control on my own. This requires something that we call vision. Right? Vision is the number one aspect of a leader, according to the Gallup polling. When Gallup asked all kinds of people to define what makes them a good leader, or what makes a good leader in their eyes, the number one thing they came across is that a leader has vision. Well, that makes sense. You don't want to be like the blind leading the blind. And if you're the blind, you don't want to be led by someone who's blind. You want the person who's leading you to know where they're going and to be able to take you there. So they have to have that vision, that ability to look into the future, into the unknown, and to find pathways that are going to bring you through the unknown successfully. Now, this is a real gift. And sometimes I think in the world of work, visionary leaders aren't always credited appropriately. I'm just sharing that with you because we tend to esteem those who can really execute well, or we esteem those who can plan well. And the visionary is often left being made to feel a little bit guilty for being visionary, right? Like, that's the guy with the big ideas. That's the guy, and you're the idea guy. No one wants to be the idea guy because the idea guy gets the dream and everyone else gets the nightmare, right? Like, I think we should take it in this direction. And then people are like, how in the world are we going to do this? I remarked that, I noticed that because I see, for example, when the president will announce a plan, immediately all the press will circle around the president and then say to him, well, what about this and what about this? As if he has it all figured out. Look, it's kind of hard to have it all figured out. I mean, you have a vision you want us to go to, but people want not just a vision, they want a plan. Well, the plan is the next step, okay? But before you can have a plan, you have to have a vision for where you're going to go. It's like the chicken and the egg. People aren't satisfied unless they have a plan. They'll believe in a vision with a plan, right? They'll follow a vision with a plan. But if you just have a vision but you can't have a plan if you don't have the vision. So there's two steps here. The first is I've got to have this aspiration that's realistic enough to be compelling and to warrant building a plan around. But it has to be an aspiration for something that I'm not quite sure necessarily of how I'm going to get there. But I know that that's where we got to go. It's a unique aspect, and it allows for creativity, it allows for innovation, but also it allows for success. Because let's just be honest, everybody, if the goal of life was to simply execute tasks, your businesses would all fail. Your families would fail as well. Family is as much about a creative energy as it is about putting shoes on the kids' feet and sending them to school. I mean, there needs to be something more, a passion and a zest for life that gets the kids up out of bed in the morning and that allows them to be motivated to actually form that family culture, to form those bonds, because they realize that their life is bigger than just subsistence. Life is more than survival. Life is thriving. And if your life is not thriving, then something essential is missing. All right, well, how do I get to that something more? Well, that's difficult. And you can't just follow a plan to get there. You need to be able to develop this ability to look into the unknown and find what is knowable, to look into the darkness and to see the light. It's almost like a leader is given an empty box and they can reach into the empty box and pull out a rabbit. And be like, where in the world did you get that from? And the answer is, I don't know. Yeah, but at the same time, I might not know, but I know that I need to do it over and over again. Right? A true leader finds the way because a true leader never lets their heart die. They allow the love that they have in their heart, that is the desire that they have for the good that they want to attain, whatever that is, to push them to find the way. And of course, God works in all of this. And God works in this in a mighty way. He works on the first hand, just in the first level, just so that we can actually do it. Remember what I say all the time, there's 3 ways to work as a Christian leader. The first is that you do things for God. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's marvelous. And so I'm going to build a bridge and I'm going to dedicate this to God's glory, because with this bridge, people can drive across the river. And with that comes a greater economy. With a great economy comes a greater standard of living. Greater standard of living redounds to all kinds of goods for people. They can live a better life. Okay, so I'm doing this for God. The second way that we can work as a Christian is doing things with God. Right? So doing things with God means that I take my faith and I ask Him to guide me and to help me to do the natural things that I'm doing well. So if I'm going to swing a hammer, I ask that His grace allows me to not miss the nail. And then I hit the hammer and I'm doing things with His grace. The third level is the highest form of Christian leadership or Christian activity. And it's where we do things in Christ, not just for God or with God, but in God. That is, that God is performing His work through us. Now, this is something that's a whole other level, because we can't really control what those effects are, because the effects are bigger than ourselves. But it's where the real beautiful things happen. The meaningfulness and purpose of our life is only achieved, meaning in a perfect way, fulfilled, and all that it can be when it's done, when our lives are at the service of God, when He uses us as His instruments. Because now He's working His effects through us, and His effects are much more marvelous, life-giving, beyond anything else that we could possibly want or imagine, right? And that's the real goal here. How do I do that? How do I let God use me as His instrument? Well, I wrote a book on the subject. As a matter of fact, it's called Coached by Paul the Apostle, available from Scepter Publishers. Coached by Paul the Apostle. And in chapter 4, I really focus in on the way that God will create a new vision for the world by asking us to surrender to Him in our own challenge to find vision ourselves. When we are struggling and find ourselves weak and bereft of vision, there's actually an opportunity for us to allow God to be glorified. And some of the best visions for the world come from those who couldn't find any on their own.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
You know, in many ways, the life of St. Paul was a paradoxical one, because you have in him a man of singular industry, singular drive, of incredible efficiency, who produced, things that communities and achievements that continue to this day, that are still with us. The other day, I was able to take a pilgrimage to Greece, and I went to Philippi, for example, which is a city in Greece. And what did I find there? But the church. There it is. The same church that St. Paul founded in Philippi is still there, as it's there in Thessaloniki, as it's there in Athens. These places where Paul went, I went to Ephesus, where you found the church to this day. The same organizational structure in its essence, and the same belief that it had 2,000 years ago when St. Paul came to found it. How do you do that? It's a feat that's never been replicated. The Catholic Church remains today as the oldest institution, continual institution on the face of the earth. There's nothing that has lasted longer, been more successful in terms of organizational leadership. How did he do it? Well, I don't think any human being could do it, because no other human being has even come close. And yet here's St. Paul who does this. It's not just a spirit. It's not just a truth. It's an organization that he's put, and that has passed on her beliefs and her structure and her powers from generation to generation. How did he do this? It wasn't just St. Paul, you see, it was God. And then the things that this church has accomplished. From forgiveness of sins, people being rekindled in their hope, and that's marriages that are formed, families that are formed, children that have been given eternal life. And it's been done for 2,000 years. Demons driven out, sick people cured, and this is what the church does, and the church has been doing it. And how is all that done? That's so far beyond any of the control of the skills or the influence of the Christians themselves. And the answer is, it's done by God. That God uses broken vessels to carry the treasures of his glory. And he uses sinners to proclaim his holiness. And he uses feeble leaders with their own humanity that's good and can do things, but that is severely limited at the same time, in order for him to accomplish his greatest works. And so it's paradoxical, right? It's almost like when we are weak, then we are strong. And this, of course, was the whole line of St. Paul in 2 Corinthians 12. He looked at his life and he said, of myself, I don't have what it takes to succeed, to drive this path to success. I lack so many things. In my past, I have all kinds of things I feel guilty for. In my present, I have so many weaknesses. I'm prone to anger. I can't, even another saint, St. Barnabas, who was a saint, couldn't live with him. That two had to separate from each other. That's a limitation, right? St. Paul was very keenly aware he didn't have enough money. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have peace around him. People were constantly persecuting him. There were riots that were forming around him. He was being driven out of towns. How is he supposed to succeed in founding a church in a town when the mobs come and drive him out? Well, in one case, St. Paul went right back to the same town that the mobs have driven him out from. That's how you do it. You simply don't quit. Well, it's more than that, though. You see, Paul was constantly made to feel his inadequacy. And what's so paradoxical is that this man who was so successfully efficient was successfully efficient while constantly bemoaning his inadequacy to accomplish anything. That's a paradox. And that's the Christian paradox. And what Paul says is that in our weakness, if we live that weakness, if we live that insufficiency, right, with faith, and we surrender it to Christ, Christ will use it for his glory. Now notice, we don't always succeed. It's not that Christ will then come and suddenly, make us successful in the world's eyes, but he will use it for his glory. We will bear witness, in other words, to the power of Christ by embracing our lack of power and leading through it. So there's a whole bunch to say about leading through our own strengths. And of course, I've done many classes with you on this and how we lead and all that. But there's also an amazing lesson about learning how to lead through your weakness. To the point that I kind of wonder If any organization is really strong until it becomes aware of its weakness. So something I want to refer to you, especially if you're the business owners right there, and like I'm watching you and I'm seeing your faces. It works, right? Like, could you think about it? Could you get your leadership team together and instead of talking about everything that's perfect and everything that they're accomplishing, what if you were to say, guys, are we aware of where we're not leading well? Or am I aware as a leader of where I'm hurting people? Or am making a bad impression on people, or where I'm doing behaviors that actually are antithetical to the leadership I'm trying to give, that are not helping me get to the goal. Right? If I'm not aware of them, then I still have those weaknesses, but I can't be strong because I'm not even willing to accept that I have an imperfection. And also that my team has an imperfection, that my company has an imperfection. We're scared of that. But I want to point this out to you. I think that you cannot really be strong until you recognize that you are weak, where you are flawed, what you are missing, because otherwise you act like you have everything, and in fact you don't. Now, where can we go, of course, when we see that? Well, we can try to develop our strengths and all that. We need to do that. But from a Christian perspective, remember, there's a deeper goal. There's something else that's being achieved through the workplace. It's not just my money. It's not just my worldly success. It's not just us achieving our projects. There's also a deeper purpose for what we're doing. And this is a Christian perspective. This is where faith comes in. Someone who doesn't have faith, they can say, I totally don't accept that. Well, that's fine. You don't have faith. But for those of us that do have faith, God has a plan that's bigger than our own. And when I'm trying to create a vision, I need to be open to letting God express his will through that vision. What is God trying to achieve? Usually, it's not going to be some sort of objective. It's not going to be God wants another bridge, although that can happen. God can say, I want you to build a bridge over there, or I want to develop this type of, wonderful invention that'll save from cancer. And that can, in fact, be God's will, and God's vision for that thing is there. But most of the time, it's in the way that it's done. God wants our workers, our interaction as people, to be sanctified into a place where he can work in hearts. In other words, almost like the real purpose of work in God's plan is not just the work itself, but what work achieves by being done inside the workers. It's what St. John Paul II calls the subjective meaning of work, not the objective meaning of what work does, but what work does in us, right? And here, there's the way that we lead is almost as important as the goal to which we lead. And this is where St. Paul's teaching on vision and his example on vision can really resonate with us and give us a lasting and meaningful example as we move forward in our own leadership. And I want to look at that. How did St. Paul choose to lead in a way that let God use his leadership as his instrument?
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
If we compare the world of St. Paul to our own modern day society, of course, there are many things that are different, but there's also a lot that's the same. As a matter of fact, it's different in its shape and its manifestations, but the challenges are very much the same. Here's an example. In the world of St. Paul, he was facing an empire that had a totally different philosophy and a totally different view of religion than he did. He was Jewish, the empire was pagan. For the empire, there were many gods, and none of them were really God. They were simply kind of manifestations of the divinity. And so you could put up many gods, you could worship many gods, and all of them wouldn't really be worship of the one. They would be instead an expression of respect and a desire for you to elevate yourself in power to more closely resemble the divine nature. I mean, you can look at that and say, wow, what can you do with that? Compared to Judaism, where you only have one God, and he is God alone, and to him belongs all worship and all devotion of our hearts, with the exception of anything else. And that worship is the worship of the Creator, the one unique being who sustains all things and whom we can perhaps resemble, but whose power we can never claim for our own. Very different worldview. Now, St. Paul is sent in this to say, now go and bring the pagan world into the world of this kind of faith. On top of it, I want you to believe not just in one God, but that he had a son, which is already amazing. How can one God have a son? Well, he does. And both of them are the one God, even though they're different. So we can't even figure that out to this day. And yet we believe it. It's called the Trinity. So go and bring that faith of the Trinity through Jesus Christ risen from the dead to these people. And then God gives them absolutely no plan to do that. Like all he says is, suffer for my name. And said, now go and preach. So St. Paul has to go out into this impossibility. What am I even trying to achieve? Right? And he has to let God lead him beyond anything he could imagine on his own. Because what resulted from Paul's endeavors, and we see this in the 4th chapter of my book, if you read it, coached by Paul the Apostle, you'll see, I mean, what results from his endeavors is something so far beyond anything that he could control on his own. And this is so beautiful. What if God had the similar desire for your life? What if, in fact, what he was trying to achieve through your life was something much beyond anything your earthly vision could even dream of? Like, well, what is God? Why is God doing what he's doing in my life? What does God really want to accomplish? Could you even claim to know it? I don't think St. Paul could have looked forward and said, I'm going to leave behind a hierarchical church, that will one day have websites and he didn't need to know all of that. That's all in God's vision. But God shared his vision with Paul. And he shared his vision with Paul in a way that required a lot of courage. Because the vision that God gave to St. Paul was for things that did not exist according to pathways that he did not know, but that he had to discover by pushing himself blindly at times against the wall of the impossibilities in front of him with faith and conviction and bravery. I'll give you an example. When Paul gets chased out of Philippi, he goes to Thessaloniki. And then he's chased out of Thessaloniki and he goes to Berea. And then he gets chased out of Berea and he finds himself in Athens. And in Athens, he literally, it says, is going on the street speaking to anyone who will listen to him about Jesus Christ. It's an amazing thought. Well, what was Paul's vision? Paul's vision was, I'm going to found the church. I'm going to bring this community of faith to the people. But did Paul know how he was going to do that? Evidently not. He simply spoke to anyone who would listen to him. And God led him by speaking to anyone who listened to him. He ends up speaking at the Areopagus in front of the leaders of the day in their political assembly. And you know what happens? They laugh at him. And so what does Paul do? He goes to Corinth and he starts to found the church there. And you see this man who's possessed by a vision that seems impossible. Not only do the poor reject him, but the rich reject him as well. And he can't even get a foothold in the cities before they drive him away. Just when is he going to say he's going to quit? And the idea is Paul never quit. He allowed his heart to be courageous in the presence of the impossibility, and he went after the vision that God gave him, regardless of how much it seemed that it was possible. Right now, we have to be prudent. I'm not saying that to go off and just, be like the man from La Mancha, right? Don Quixote living in a fantasy world. That's a mockery of what I'm trying to say. You have to have prudence. It's just that at the same time, you have to have something more than prudence. You have to have this surrender of our minds and our hearts to the Lord and where he is calling us. We might not know where that is with certitude, but we can know it with faith. See? Faith means, God, I have this vision. I have this desire, and I'm going to try to make it happen because I believe that it's from you. So if you don't believe the desire is from him, don't try, right? But if you think the desire is from him and there's no reason you shouldn't, and it's not a bad thing, well, then why not go for that vision? You might find in the process doors close, others open, things are impossible that you never thought were impossible, that you can't live it out the way you thought, and you might end up in a different space. But that's what it means to let God lead you, to allow His vision to be visible through your own. But this requires that you accept the darkness that's there. You almost find a light in the darkness. And the light is this knowledge that you have, this desire that you have. And then the darkness is that you might not see how to do it. That's what Paul had to do. And what happened through that is that God did His work. We can think about this in your own family, right? Like, I don't think anybody who starts to have kids, I'm just God's gift to parenting. I mean, every parent is overwhelmed. And then you say, well, how are we supposed to fight against a secular culture? I don't even know how to lead my family effectively, right? So if I can't lead my family effectively, I can't have the culture. If I can't have the culture, then the world's going to take over my house, and then you're petrified with fear. Well, on the contrary, there's another way for you to do that. And it's to say, I don't know exactly how, but I know that if I try, God will lead me. And so the vision that I have is for a beautiful family and a beautiful culture. And I'm going to take the next step that I can and enter into that darkness, confident that God is going to lead. And at that point, what happens? Well, you feel your own ineptitude, you feel your own inadequacy, but also you open yourself to God's strength. You allow Him to now be leading you in the darkness by a light that you can't fully see, but you know is there. This is how St. Paul did it. He says it in 2 Corinthians, when we are weak, then we are strong, which means also that when we have a vision that seems impossible, God might just be working to make possible the impossible, and to do something with us greater than we could ever have done on our own. He makes us more than a leader. He makes us His leader.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.